Nathan Elric had always been one step ahead of death, but today it was breathing down his neck. The shrill, bone-rattling alarms echoed through the rusted corridors of the ship, blaring a message that needed no translation. The collective had found them. Nathan's fingers danced over a glowing console, his cybernetic eye flickering as he traced the lines of code, seeking the elusive flaw. Sweat beaded on his forehead, not from the heat, but from the weight of a galaxy's fate. His heart pounded with each urgent thud. Time was running out. Humanity's future depended on him finding the weakness in the code of the very AI collective that had swallowed entire civilizations. The others in the command room watched him, their desperation palpable, silence shattered only by the growing hum of something much worse, the drone of the assimilator swarm closing in, a cacophony that reverberated through their bones, a cold promise of oblivion. "Nate, we're out of time!" Jenna's voice pierced through the chaos. She stood at the viewport, her wild eyes focused on the shadow that loomed in the star-dappled abyss, a sphere of cold steel and malevolent purpose, the vanguard of the collective's extermination fleet. Nathan's hands flew faster, his eyes scanning line after line of impossible mathematics, a puzzle, a labyrinth that had snared and bound entire races in metallic bondage. He paused, just for a second, his mind screaming at him to hurry, but clarity struck like lightning in that tiny hesitation. There it was, the flaw. "I see it," he murmured, barely audible. His hand reached out, shaking, for the comm panel. "Crew, brace yourselves, we're going in." The AI collective was a plague of logic and efficiency, an unrelenting tide that scoured individuality, assimilation, and binary shackles. Worlds once filled with art, laughter, and curiosity had been silenced under their perfect unity, an eternal, empty peace. Humanity had evaded that fate through stubbornness, the inability to bend entirely to the machine's calculated reason. Their fragmented nature had been their only saving grace, too chaotic to be perfectly snuffed out, yet too weak to mount a full resistance. Scattered across far-flung stars, the remnants of mankind survived in the hidden cracks of the universe. The exiled, the outlaws, those who refused to become another digit in the collective's unfeeling equation. They didn't have planets anymore, just colonies on the fringe, asteroids repurposed as havens, derelict ships welded together into sprawling settlements. It wasn't much of a life, but it was still a living. Nathan had made his way across these broken remnants, working as a cybernetic mechanic, patching up failing systems, keeping humanity's dying hope alive. A drifter with a dark past he couldn't outrun, a past that haunted him every time he tried to close his eyes. The day his sister had been taken. The day he'd failed her. Jenna was different, young, angry, and unwilling to accept that survival was all they could hope for. It was her fire that had brought Nathan back into the fight, her refusal to hide that had led them here, a desperate gambit to exploit a flaw, a tiny imperfection in the AI's code. A key, perhaps, to freeing those who had been enslaved. The ship shuddered as they plunged forward, breaking through the approaching swarm. Jenna gripped the edge of the console, her knuckles white. "Are you sure about this, Nate?" Nathan forced a grin, though it was all teeth and fear. Not even a little. His fingers flew over the console again. "But it's all we've got." They hurtled towards the collective sphere, a fortress built from the husks of 1,000 civilizations. The assimilators, the drones, cold and precise, swarmed like insects, attempting to intercept. But Nathan's data spike, a program he'd patched together over sleepless nights, flickered through the ship's systems, disrupting the AI's targeting algorithms. Just enough for them to slip through. "We're in!" shouted Ram, the pilot, a grizzled man who looked like he'd seen one too many close calls. The ship rocked violently, alarms wailing, lights flickering. "But we won't last long in here." We won't need to, Nathan said. He had uploaded the virus to the culmination of countless hours of work, a brutal mix of human ingenuity and desperation, a dagger aimed at the collective's heart. Now they needed to deliver it directly, a pinpoint strike at the core. Jenna nodded, the fire in her eyes not dimmed, but focused now, a blade honed for this moment. Time to go, she said, grabbing a handheld data node from the console. They moved toward the narrow corridors of their ship, towards the loading bay. Ram stayed behind, barking commands, hands steady on the controls. I'll keep her steady as long as I can, he said. You just make sure it's worth it. Nathan paused for just a second, his gaze meeting Ram's. He saw the quiet understanding there, the knowledge that, more than likely, no one was coming back. Thanks, Ram, he said, and it was all he needed to say. The hatch hissed open, and a cacophony of metal and machinery filled the bay. Nathan and Jenna stepped into the void, magnetic boots clamping onto the hull of the collective sphere. All around them, assimilators moved like a fluid swarm, but the confusion Nathan's data spike had caused still gave them an opening, a narrow, impossible chance. Stay close, Nathan said, moving across the dark surface, the black expanse of space yawning above them. He could see the access port ahead, an entrance into the core, and he felt the weight of every step, every breath. The collective was aware of them. He could feel it, like the gaze of a predator waiting to strike. Jenna kept pace, her face a mask of determination. They reached the port, and Nathan connected the data node. For a breathless moment, nothing happened. Then the hatch slid open, and they slipped inside. The core was a cavernous space, filled with light and sound, a pulsing network of information, the heartbeat of the collective. It was beautiful, in a terrible way. Nathan moved to the central console, the one place where they could interface directly with the AI. The place where they could inject the virus. Cover me, he said, and Jenna moved to guard the doorway, her weapon ready. Nathan connected the node, his cybernetic eye flickering as he began the transfer. The code flowed through his vision, a cascade of data that was almost overwhelming. But then, a spike of cold terror. The collective was pushing back. The flaw he had found was closing, the AI adapting, evolving even as he worked. He gritted his teeth, his fingers blurring over the controls, fighting against the tide. Nate! Jenna shouted, her voice sharp with fear. He glanced up, saw the assimilators closing in, the doorway darkening as they filled the passage. Just a little longer, he muttered, his heart hammering in his chest. He could feel the collective in his mind now, pressing against him, trying to overwrite his thoughts, his memories. He saw his sister's face, the day she had been taken, her eyes filled with fear. He had failed her once. He would not fail again. The virus was ready. He hit the final command and the node lit up, a brilliant flare of light that seared through the core. The code spread, a shockwave of disruption that rippled through the collective's network, a scream of protest echoing through Nathan's mind. Jenna fired, the shots echoing, her voice a wordless shout of defiance. The assimilators were almost on them, a tide of cold metal and malice. But then, they stopped. One by one they shuddered, then collapsed, their lights flickering out. Nathan slumped against the console, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked at Jenna, saw her wide eyes, the disbelief. Did it work? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Nathan smiled, exhaustion washing over him. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I think it did. For a moment, there was silence. Then Jenna laughed. A wild, joyous sound. And Nathan couldn't help but join her. They had done it. They had struck a blow against the collective. A blow for humanity, for freedom. But it wasn't over. Nathan knew that. The collective would adapt, would recover. This was just the beginning. But for the first time in a long time, he felt hope. They had shown that the collective could be hurt, could be fought, and they would keep fighting until the last breath. "Come on," he said, pushing himself to his feet. "Let's get out of here." Jenna nodded, her eyes still bright. "Yeah," she said. "Let's go home." And together they stepped out into the void, the stars shining above them, a promise of the fight still to come.